Time to talk about the first Omen. Not the first Omen. The current first Omen. That is a prequel to the original first Omen that was not called the first Omen. Someone made a call. Wasn't the right one. Really like this film. A lot of twists and turns, so I might not spoil some of it. But the whole premise is basically that, Margaret, who is a nun who's yet to take her vows, some similarities to Immaculate, it's kind of insane, hasn't taken her vows, attaches herself to a kid that is kind of acting a little fucking off. I mean, she's acting a little grudgy, long hair in the face, all that stuff. She's acting a little fucking Samara from, The Ring. So basically what happens is she gets attached to this little girl, finds out that within the church there is a conspiracy to have someone give birth to the Antichrist, because the church believes that by creating the offspring through a non-consensual sexual relationship between a creature and a woman, they can create the Antichrist. And by creating the Antichrist, they could put the Antichrist in a place of power so that when they get older, they make bad choices that make the general populace turn towards the church as its salvation. It's crazy when I say it, and it sounds cartoony, but in comparison to whatever the fuck Immaculate was trying to do, this is some Francis Ford Coppola levels of writing. But to be honest, its presentation makes it believable. It's a slow-paced film that takes its time to settle in the groundwork for a lot of disturbing imagery. And the framework for this idea that there is another church within the church that's pulling the strings. And I mean, that idea isn't very... it's not a rare idea. It's not a rare concept, a shadowy group of people with an agenda that are pulling strings. I mean, this is kind of like the setup is by the numbers political thriller or religious thriller, right? But it's in its presentation where it kind of stands on its own, in that the color grading is really beautiful. Every shot has a very distinct and meticulous composition where it's like there's dimension, there's layers in the shot, and maybe looking in too deeply is not what you do, right? But I can't help it. I love framework. I like composition. I know some people do kind of appreciate that, and for me, seeing these shots where there's something on screen that's happening, and the importance is the dialogue and the exchange between these characters. But for there to be cinematography that still stands on its own if there wasn't dialogue, to me means the world, because that means that you're utilizing the full capacity of these 2 hours to tell your story to complete utter perfection in the eyes of you as the writer or director, right? So whatever isn't being told through dialogue is being told through scenery. That's a medium where you show, don't necessarily tell, although there is dialogue and everything, right? But there's just a haunting ambiance to it all. I compared Immaculate to how dull and boring it was, and how, when you compare it to like another film about another nun called The Nun, and The Nun 2, despite people not liking besides people not liking those films, The Nun 2 has a signature aesthetic. If they were to make a Nun 3, they wouldn't have to tell you or show you the nun to be like, that looks familiar, because there's a very potent signature in the Nun films, especially in 2. And with this one, there's also one, and it feels very non-generic. It feels very much like there's a signature, there's a personality to the scenes. The nun, Margaret, who is going through this sort of unfolding this narrative of conspiracy within the church, she did a great job. And it's funny because, again, I'll compare it to Immaculate. Sydney Sweeney couldn't sell me a fucking rock as a rock if she showed it to me and it was a rock, because that's how bad she acted in that film. But Margaret was just such an empathetic character, someone that I was like, man, she's caught in a world she's excited about, and it's about to get turned upside down. And imagine like me as someone that wants to be part of the industry in a deeper level, and I get to direct, and then I see just how bad it is with all the secret underbelly goings-ons that people talk about, you know, all the drug trafficking and the human trafficking and all the things that happen behind the scenes. And to have something like that get in the way of your dream and what you, that's a character arc right there. And they explore it here, and I really love that. I really love that element, because Margaret isn't just a character that we're following to get us to the scary shit. She is a character you actually give a fuck about. And so that makes, in the slow moments, it makes it about the character, and because you're already interested, you don't care it's slow. So when something scary happens, it hits you, and you're like, damn, that was a payoff. I hope she's okay. That's the kind of horror that I like. That's why I love The Exorcist. You know, that's why I love Hereditary. Slow burn. And this wasn't as slow as those films. There's not an hour of nothing happening, but it's not blatant horror that hits you over the head until like the last 40 minutes. And at that point, you know a good amount of what's happening. So these things are believable to you now. There are a couple very creative scenes that play with, there's one particular scene that stands out that is in the trailer, where she's sitting against the bed going like, you know, shaking back and forth, and she hears a whisper and goes, who says that? That scene is terrifying, because there is, if you guys have ever seen Pulse, right, the J-horror film about ghosts coming through electromagnetic devices and electromagnetic pulses, there's a very famous scene that you can kind of always see on YouTube being analyzed, and it's about a ghost kind of coming out of the darkness and kind of like mimicking human motion, because it can't exactly do it, but it's trying, and there's something so uncanny and terrifying about it. This scene was clearly inspired by that, but it still was very much its own scene, and it felt really grounded in the where it needed to be in that place in the film. And they keep the camera there for a while, and you're just waiting, and it's not a jump scare. It's this unease that you know that whatever's in the shadow is slowly going to unveil itself. And when you see it, it doesn't disappoint, because it is building up to seeing this terrible thing coming towards her. And between the lighting and the way that they play with space in that scene, because she's in a small room, but it feels like there's depth. She starts going mad at this point in the film, because it really is fucking with her. There's just so much detail to these scenes, and it's just the direction really just worked for this film. I could admire this film. I could put it on mute and admire it for just the pure aesthetic value, the sheer horror of the ambiance and the atmosphere, and it's just kind of dripping in that. You know, it doesn't rewrite anything. It's not super original, but in a place in time where we get films like this almost every year, this is the one where I can hold it separate from those and go, this took all these ideas, made it its own, gave it a signature, and did it better than all those films. And so it doesn't have to be original if the presentation on its own can stand up against those other films. And I think this film really, for me, solidified that this director, one, I'm super excited to see what she does next, but when I think about Exorcist Believer and how they tarnished that film, and as a direct continuation of my favorite horror film of all time, and I took it to heart, like how they fucked up that entire film. The framework was already made. If you're gonna go there, which they shouldn't have in the first place, but if you're gonna go there, you know, because this is where we're at, right? I mean, they remade The Crow, right? And I'm excited. I was excited for a continuation of The Exorcist, although in the back of my head, I always said, there are films you should never touch. And The Exorcist is, I mean, look at the director. The man was a legend. You don't just go and grab David Gordon Green and go, we're gonna remake that, or we're gonna continue that with David Gordon Green, really? Anyway, Seth, I think Seth, fucking, anyway, bless you. My cat is sneezing. So that being said, this director, because they fired David Gordon Green from the next sequels of The Exorcist, if anyone deserves and can pay respects to The Exorcist and the 70s sensibilities of that film, how it's shot, how it feels, the groundedness, we kind of saw that with this film. Taking not a demonic possession film, but a film having to do with demonic, iconography, and turning it into something grounded as a continuation of something that's already existed and making it believable. That's what The Exorcist believer needed. And I'm kind of hoping that now that they fired David Gordon Green, they go and look at her and go, maybe we should give her a call, and because they're still gonna make those sequels. They spent, I forgot, like $450 million for the rights to The Exorcist. They're still gonna make those sequels, but they're gonna go in a different direction. They should hire her immediately, because she paid a lot of attention and did this film justice. That's it. That's all. Also, Total Eclipse is happening tonight, so if you got the mark of the beast on your head, stay away from me, okay? Okay, that's it.